Question 21. Ethicist. On average, animals raised on grain must be fed 16 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of meat. A pound of meat is more nutritious for humans than a pound of grain, but 16 pounds of grain could feed many more people than could a pound of meat. With grain yields leveling off, large areas of farmland going out of production each year, and the population rapidly expanding, we must accept the fact that consumption of meat will soon be morally unacceptable. All right, so first step, argument or facts. Clearly, we have an argument. The conclusion of this passage being the last part of the last sentence. We must accept the fact that consumption of meat will soon be morally unacceptable. And what evidence does the ethicist give us to prove that we must accept the fact that consumption of meat will soon be morally unacceptable? Well, he tells us that animals raised on grain must be fed 16 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of meat. 1 pound of meat is more nutritious, but 16 pounds of grain could obviously feed many more people. And then, in addition, we have grain yields leveling off, large areas of farmland going out of production each year, and the population rapidly expanding. All right, so now that we have a clear understanding of this argument, let's turn to the question stem. Which one of the following, if true, would most weaken the ethicist's argument? Most weaken. So we have a weakening question. So trying to find an answer choice that weakens this argument that we must accept the fact that consumption of meat will soon be morally unacceptable based on the premises about grain, the amount of grain to produce 1 pound of meat, and then grain yields leveling off, large areas of farmland going out of production, and the population rapidly expanding. So turning our attention to A, even though it has been established that a vegetarian diet can be healthy, many people prefer to eat meat and are willing to pay for it. Again, something about what people prefer to do. Maybe people prefer to act immorally. That's not the issue in this passage. It's not about whether or not they're willing to pay for it. It's about whether or not meat consumption is going to be morally acceptable based on the amount of grain used, the grain yields leveling off, large areas of farmland going out of production, and the population rapidly expanding. So A is completely irrelevant, and A is out. B, often cattle or sheep can be raised to maturity on grass from pasture land that is unsuitable for any other kind of farming. Does that weaken this argument? And you notice that it clearly does. By telling us we can raise cattle or sheep to maturity on grass. The passage said that eating meat is going to be morally unacceptable because of the amount of grain used in its production. B tells us, wait a minute, we can raise cattle or sheep to maturity on grass from pasture land that is unsuitable for any other kind of farming. So B clearly weakens this argument. So B would be the correct answer. And again, because the passage told us it is going to be morally unacceptable because of the amount of grain used to produce 1 pound of meat. B tells us we can use grass to bring these cattle and sheep to maturity, and not only just grass from pasture land that is unsuitable for other farming, so clearly weakens the argument. But again, let's make sure. C, if a grain diet is supplemented with protein derived from non-animal sources, it can have nutritional value equivalent to that of a diet containing meat. Okay, great. That clearly does not weaken this argument. If anything, it seems to strengthen it by saying that you can be healthy on a grain diet by supplementing it with some non-animal protein. So definitely does not weaken. C is out. D, although prime farmland near metropolitan areas is being lost rapidly to suburban development, we could reverse this trend by choosing to live in areas that are already urban. Okay, great. Still doesn't address the whole grain issue. Does not weaken this argument. So D would be out. And then lastly, moving to E, nutritionists agree that a diet composed solely of grain products is not adequate for human health. Very popular answer choice. Students think that weakens this argument, but it doesn't. Because even if a diet composed solely of grain is not adequate for human health, do not make the jump and assume that that means meat is now going to be morally acceptable. We could put other things in that diet besides grain and other than meat that could make it a healthy diet. Something like what C said, right? Supplementing the grain diet with a protein derived from non animal sources. So the fact that a diet solely of grain is not adequate doesn't mean you make the jump to say, oh, that means I have to eat meat. No, there could be other things we could add to that diet that make it healthy. So E has no impact on this argument and E would be eliminated. And again, because having a diet solely of grain not being adequate for human health does not mean it's okay to eat meat or that eating meat is morally acceptable. So E does not weaken and E is out.